Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY sailboat refit video here aboard good old Athena. This week I will continue to work on the new nav station. Thank you to all of those of you who commented on last weekend's video with various suggestions for changes. We'll get back to those a little later in the video. Last week I adhered these blocks of plywood to the hull using a dab of thickened epoxy. I'm going to use these blocks to secure a larger piece of plywood that we're going to put up later in this video. Since last week I've coated each of these blocks with multiple coats of epoxy and laid up a few layers of glass. These are now way stronger than I need them to be, and they should also be protected against any condensation. I've also applied a couple of coats of Sigma Cover 280 and Sigma Duo 520 to the inside of this area, so this should be all prepped for me to start putting up insulation. As insulation, I'll be using Armaflex XG. This is a closed cell, highly flexible foam insulation. I've seen people use this in anything from boats to RVs to houses. As you might be able to tell, I have ordered way too much for just the nav station, but that is because I plan on using this stuff for the entire boat. I've got two different thicknesses. I've got a 19mm one and a 13mm one. That is a combined thickness of 32mm, which is more than double that I've got aboard Obelix, the boat I've been living aboard for the last 4 years. Armaflex XG comes in two versions. There is a self-adhesive version, which is the one I've got here, and then there's also a non-self-adhesive version. The foam I used aboard Obelix was a different brand, and it was the non-self-adhesive version, so it'll be interesting to see if this stuff is any easier to work with. There are three different Armaflex products I would consider using aboard a sailboat. There is their AT foam, which is the top of the line, crazy expensive one. Then there's the XG version, which is the one I've got here, which is identical to the AT version. The only difference is it does not have their microband technology, which is supposed to help prevent mold. But as a long-time liveaboard, I've got other methods for preventing mold, so I'm sure the XG is going to be fine. And then last and also least, there is the ACE foam, which, as I've understood it, is an older type of foam that is not approved for use in buildings, so that kind of takes it off the list if you're going to be living aboard the boat. If you ask me, the XG version is where you get the most bang for your unit of currency. Of course, your mileage may vary. The thermal continuity of Armaflex XG is similar to that of mineral wool, which is commonly used to insulate houses, at least over here. The 32mm I'm going to be adding to the hull pales in comparison to the 250mm you'd normally add to a house. But as I've said before, everything aboard a boat is a compromise. If I add 250mm to the hull, there's not going to be any room left for me. One of the big upsides to using a closed cell foam like this product for insulating a fiberglass hull is the fact that you don't need to worry about a moisture barrier. All you do is simply just stick this stuff on the hull, make sure you don't have any big voids in between the insulation and the hull, and you're good to go. Just as you don't want any voids between the insulation and the hull, of course you also want the insulation to stick really well to the hull. And I'm gonna spend the rest of today just prepping this area, wiping it down thoroughly just to make sure that there's no dust here and no grease. It is a cold, wet, rainy and slightly depressing Saturday morning, but everything over here is set up, so let's go ahead and put up some insulation. That only took a fraction of the time I thought it was gonna take. Part of it was because I lucked out. There is exactly 1 meter between these two pieces of plywood, which is the width of the insulation, so that saved me some time. But also this stuff does seem like it's easier to work with than the non-self-adhesive version I used aboard Obelix. Earlier this week, I cut and painted this piece of plywood. This is where I'm going to be mounting terminal bars, fuse blocks, various electronics, stuff like that. And with this in place, there's nothing stopping me from building the rest of the nav station. The plan is, of course, to mount some of these distribution panels here on a piece of plywood that flips down this way. This thin strip of plywood you just saw me cut and round the corners on is to help support all of that. Yep, that looks pretty neat. I've got a couple of different types of hinges in here to see what works best, and also a lock. There's going to be both DC and AC wiring in there, and also some pretty expensive electronics, so it would be nice to be able to lock this to make sure no big or small hands get in there. The reason I say small hands is of course because, yeah, nope, nobody's pregnant. I only say small hands to freak out the dum-dums, and I say that in a loving way. The dum-dums in the comment section that keeps theorizing that we're going to have kids any second now. We don't have any plans of having kids anytime soon, but still, it would be nice to be able to lock this stuff up. Hold up, my spidery sense is tingling. It's telling me that somebody is about to leave a comment saying, but wait a minute, what if you want to get into that locker in a hurry? What if it's an emergency? Well, people place way too much trust in locks. A lock is just a complicated door handle that any brick will open. If I put one of these up in this corner here and another one in this corner over here, this should be rock solid. There was a comment on the last video asking why I both glue and screw most of the stuff in place here aboard Athena, arguing that if I only screwed in place, I would have an easier time taking things apart. That is certainly true. The reason I both glue and screw everything is to prevent creaking, because having to live to a soundtrack of that gets tired real fast. I think I've got a piece of scrap plywood up at the workshop that would be a good fit for this. Everything I've got here aboard the boat is either way too big or too small. Aha! The raid to the workshop was a complete success. I've got this scrap piece of plywood and I got rid of all the boxes of insulation because, holy dang, they took up a lot of room. Depending on my choice of hinge, I am gonna have to trim this a little bit, because if I choose to go with the piano hinge, that's gonna take up some room, but yeah, that's a perfect fit. I can either have one of these big clunky hinges down here, which, well, I don't really love, or I can have the piano hinge, which I don't really love either, but it's gonna have to be one of them, so I think I will stick with the piano hinge. I'll of course have to cut this piano hinge to length. I've already got a metal blade in my jigsaw, so that should be pretty straightforward. I've measured the thickness of the piano hinge, and it looks like if I remove 4 millimeters from this piece, it should fit. I've already trimmed the piano hinge to length, so let's see how this all plays out. Perfect. I don't want to just drill into the bottom of the plywood here. I need some kind of support in place, just like I've got in here. Tomorrow, when the thickened epoxy has cured, I can go ahead and get this attached to the piano hinge. That is only going to be temporary though, because when I paint all of this, I want to remove the piano hinge. But until then, it would be nice to have this area closed up so I don't get a lot of dust in there. Good morning, guys! This is more or less what the nav station looked like in the last video. I've added this bit down here to help support the table, and of course the tape here is very much temporary. I got a lot of comments suggesting various changes for the nav station. There were 3 sort of popular overall themes. The most popular one was to round the corner of this table. The second most popular one was to raise the table, and then the third most popular one was to add storage in the table. I think the idea of rounding this corner is a great idea, so let's go ahead and do that. I'd like the table to match the outside radius of the seat here. The problem is I used a can of paint for the inside radius, so I don't really know the outside radius. I still have the can of paint, and I know the seat is 12mm plywood. So if we simply just offset the can and then use the plywood as a spacer, that should give me a very close approximation to the outside radius on the seat. That looks pretty cool, and from a safety and comfort standpoint, of course, it's also a little bit better. The second most suggested change was to raise the table. I've spent a lot of time this week just experimenting with different heights. This ended up being at 64 centimeters, which is in the average range for an office desk. Both Ava and I have measured our desks, me at work and her at home, and this is pretty much spot on. I believe the reason behind the comments to raise the table was because it might look a little bit cramped underneath here. Bear in mind, I'm wearing thermal underwear, thick work pants, and integrated knee pads. So what you're seeing here is not my knee, that's a knee pad. Also, what's more important for me is actually the height of the top of the table, because to be able to sit comfortably at a table, you need to have your arms parallel to the surface of the table, your shoulders relaxed, and a 90 to 120 degree bend in your elbow, which is exactly what I've got here. So yeah, the height stays where it is. The height of the top of the table also brings us to the third most suggested change, which was to integrate storage into the table, meaning to turn the table into a box and then have some kind of lid you open up. I don't really like that idea because it makes the table very thick, which would raise the top of it, which means it's not a comfortable position to sit in. And that pretty much matches all the chart tables I've sat at aboard any boat. It gets very high and very uncomfortable. Sure, if you're using this as a chart table for paper chart navigation and you're doing a lot of that while underway, it might be nice to have the table higher so you can kind of brace yourself, but that is not what this is going to be. And also, I've found out after living aboard Obelix for a while that storage where you need to move stuff to gain access to that storage, that does not lead to happiness. And that's what would happen here, because there would be a keyboard here, somebody would have put a phone here, and then you need to get something in here, so you need to move that stuff to be able to get in here. It's just, yeah, it may seem very nautical to have storage inside of the table, but I would rather be comfortable. One last comment, this one is for the paper chart aficionados. And this comment is probably going to land me in a little bit of hot water. There were some comments saying that the nav station here is too small for paper chart navigation, and I agree it's definitely on the smaller side for that, but that's because I believe paper charts is not going to be a thing that much longer. I would be surprised if we see paper charts around in, let's say, 10 years. In the unlikely event that we're going to have to bust out a paper chart to do serious navigation other than just noon positions, well, then the kitchen island, which is going to be a nice big work surface here in the middle of the boat, is probably going to be the best area to do that. We could sort of stand side by side, everybody could pitch in, it's going to be at hip level, so yeah, I think that will work out pretty well. My idea for the nav station is based around electronic navigation, but perhaps I shouldn't refer to this area as the nav station, perhaps I should refer to it as the office, because 90% of the time this is going to be used as an office and not for navigation. That is why I want this to be a comfortable spot to sit and work at for 8 hours a day. Enough yammering on, let's take this apart and put it back together for good. You might be wondering what's up with this hole and the cutout down here. Well, let me show you something really neat. Here aboard Athena, there are two attachment points for the main sheet. There's one right here and one over on the starboard side. They're both located very close to plywood bulkheads that are tabbed to the entire hull. But seeing as I've removed this bulkhead right here, I need something else to take that load. That was why I mentioned a stainless steel pole in last week's video. That is going to go all the way from up here and down, and it's going to bolt onto the structural members. I don't have that stainless steel pole yet, but I do have this piece of larch that is the correct height. Because I don't have the cabin sole in place in the middle of the boat, this will go down quite far. Can come up through that little hole Whoops. And in the little cutout notch. And there we are. Pretty cool. I might have to enlarge this hole a little bit to be able to get the real pole through there, but this means that I can put together the nav station without actually having this pole, even though it's going to be a very important part of the boat. That's it. The table can now support itself. How cool is that? I mean, it is still a little bit flimsy, but the support that's going to go here should stiffen that up nicely. I can't trim all of this excess plywood before I have the gimbal box so I can figure out the galley, but I can certainly trim a little bit. Okay, don't mess this up. The final bit of trimming up here is going to be with a flush trimming bit so that it's all nice and flush. As far as this plywood over here, well, it might actually get trimmed all the way back to here. It depends on what happens in the galley. But so far, I really love how I can sit here and still have eye contact with the person in the galley. I really like the look of the nav station. I know it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I like it. And I still have to cut that support piece that's just cardboard right now. And that's gonna do a lot for the look of the nav station, but that's gonna have to wait until next week. Even though the table is not 100% done yet, I think it's strong enough that I can go ahead and edit this video right here at the nav station, the first of hopefully many to come. I don't really know what I'll be working on next week because to fix the little bit of the table that's left here is not gonna take that much time. So yeah, we'll see. But I hope to see all of you guys back here next Sunday. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!